Where love prevails, there is no desire for power, and where power prevails, there is a lack of love. One is the shadow of the other. Carl Jung. What happens when the most instinctive and primal force of the human being, sexual energy, is redirected, sublimated, and elevated for creative and spiritual purposes? There is something within us, something raw, intense, often repressed, which, if channeled consciously, can generate masterpieces, profound cures, and extraordinary transformations. Jung did not see sexuality merely as a physical impulse, but as a powerful psychic energy, an essential part of the libido, which, when integrated, becomes the source of life, art, intuition, and genius. Unlike Freud, who gave sexuality a role more closely linked to repression and neurosis, Jung saw the libido as a broader, creative, and spiritual life force. For him, sexual energy was a manifestation of something deeper, the psyche itself in motion. In his studies of alchemy and mythology, Jung realized that sexual symbols were metaphors for the process of inner transformation, alchemical marriage, rebirth, the union of opposites. Sexuality, then, is a mirror of the individuation process. Genius is not only born of intellect. It emerges when the unconscious is heard and integrated, when the shadow is embraced, and when the raw energy of desire is transformed into vision. Many of history's geniuses, from Leonardo da Vinci to Nikola Tesla, have spoken about the power of creative chastity, or the sublimation of sexual desire, as a way of channeling vital energy into work, art, and high thought. This video will shed light on this provocative topic: how sexual energy creates geniuses, not as something magical or mystical, but as a result of the inner alchemy between instinct and conscience, between eros and logos. By understanding and integrating this force within us, we tap into an inexhaustible source of creativity, connection, and fulfillment. The journey is symbolic, but its effects are real. Carl Jung understood the libido more broadly than his master Freud. While Freud saw libido predominantly as sexual energy aimed at gratification, Jung broadened the concept to encompass all creative and transformative psychic energy. In his work Symbols of Transformation, Jung began to develop this vision, realizing that sexual impulses are actually just one facet of a broader archetypal force, which can manifest itself in sexuality as well as in creativity, spirituality, and the search for meaning. This energy, when repressed, tends to become distorted, taking on compulsive, destructive, or neurotic forms. But when recognized and redirected, a process Jung called sublimation, it becomes fuel for the evolution of consciousness. Sublimation in this context is not repression, it is transmutation, the transformation of raw material, instinct, into psychological gold, creative consciousness. Within the journey of individuation, the path of becoming what you are, sexual energy plays an essential role. Jung believed that each individual carries within them the tension between opposites, masculine and feminine, reason and emotion, spirit and flesh. Sexuality symbolizes precisely this tension, as it is the point where opposites meet. By confronting and integrating this energy, the individual not only becomes more whole, but also more creative, as they come into contact with the vital force that animates all aspects of existence. This energy, when repressed, tends to become distorted, taking on compulsive, destructive, or neurotic forms. But when recognized and redirected, a process Jung called sublimation, it becomes fuel for the evolution of consciousness. Sublimation in this context is not repression. It is transmutation, the transformation of raw material, instinct, into psychological gold, creative consciousness. Within the journey of individuation, the path of becoming what you are, sexual energy plays an essential role. Jung believed that each individual carries within them the tension between opposites, masculine and feminine, reason and emotion, spirit and flesh. Sexuality symbolizes precisely this tension, as it is the point where opposites meet. By confronting and integrating this energy, the individual not only becomes more whole, but also more creative, as they come into contact with the vital force that animates all aspects of existence. This process is deeply linked to the integration of the shadow. One of the pillars of analytical psychology, the shadow represents everything that has been repressed, denied, or forgotten because it doesn't fit the conscious image of the ego. Sexuality, often surrounded by taboos and guilt, is often pushed into this dark area of the psyche. But when we have the courage to look at it with honesty and curiosity, we find not only wounds but also hidden potential, vitality, intuition, sensitivity, creative force. Jung saw this energy as a river that can both drown and fertilize. When it flows unconsciously, we are slaves to our desires. When it rises to consciousness, we become creators of ourselves, and that's where genius is born. Good. Now on to part 3. Practical examples and reflection. Part 2, with approximately 400 words. Here we'll bring up concrete examples, stories, and metaphors to illustrate how sexual energy, when understood and transformed, can shape lives, behaviors, and awaken creative genius. Imagine an artist who, from a young age, feels an intense desire, an inner energy that seems to want to explode. At first, he associates it with sexuality, but instead of just giving it over to immediate pleasure, he channels this force into his art. He paints, writes, composes. His works vibrate with a visceral intensity because he hasn't repressed his energy. He has transformed it. This is the key to sublimation, giving a new direction to what is instinctive without denying it. Let's also think of Nikola Tesla, the genius of electricity. Tesla was known for his choice of celibacy and for his visionary ideas, often received as creative, almost mediumistic flashes. He himself said that his vital energy was too precious to be dissipated in sexual activities. What he did, in Jungian terms, was to direct his libido towards the development of thought and science, not as an escape, but as creative integration in everyday life. This same process happens subtly in many people. Someone who suffers a major disappointment in love, and instead of sinking into suffering, decides to immerse themselves in writing, dancing, healing others. Or someone who feels a deep desire for connection, but transforms it into service, compassion, innovation. These people are, albeit unconsciously, doing the work of the psyche, transforming eros into logos, instinct into consciousness. But the opposite is also true. When sexual energy is repressed, ignored, or unconsciously projected, it can manifest in compulsions, addictions, toxic relationships, or a sense of creative emptiness. Jung warned that what is not integrated turns against us. Genius, therefore, is not the result of denying desire but of understanding it deeply and redirecting it. It's like fire. If it's not contained, it consumes. If it's smothered, it goes out. But if it is placed in a creative furnace, it transforms raw material into art, words, healing, and invention. Geniuses are those who have learned to ignite this inner fire and shape it. Deep down, we all have access to this energy. The challenge is to learn to listen to it, understand it, and give it a purpose that goes beyond the immediate impulse, a purpose that leads us towards our wholeness. So let's move on to part 4, Deep Dissertation. Part 2, with around 400 words. Here we'll go deeper into the relationship between accepting and transforming sexual energy as a path to healing and inner freedom, connecting it to the collective unconscious and the archetypes of the psyche. For Jung, sexual energy, as an expression of libido, doesn't just belong to the individual. It is also rooted in the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of images, symbols, and impulses that we share as a species. That's why in mythologies around the world, we find archetypes deeply linked to sexuality and creation. Aphrodite, Shiva, Isis, Dionysus, all symbolize in some way the union of desire and transcendence. These archetypes are not just symbolic figures, but living forces that operate within us. When we come into conscious contact with them, through dreams, art, relationships, or emotional crises, something in us is summoned to transform, Sexual energy is therefore also a bridge between the personal and the collective, between the ego and the self, between the mundane and the sacred. The journey of integrating this energy inevitably involves confronting the shadow. Many people feel shame, guilt, or fear about their desires and prefer to hide them. But what is rejected doesn't disappear, it hides. The repressed sexual shadow, when not integrated, manifests itself in distorted forms. Obsessions, destructive fantasies, abusive relationships, or a paralyzing creative block. By accepting this energy as a legitimate part of the psyche, it begins to change. Desire ceases to be a tyrant and becomes a messenger. It reveals not only what is missing, but what is latent, the impulse to unite, create, and transform. Jung believed that the process of individuation, the path towards wholeness, required this reconciliation with inner eros, not as an isolated instinct, but as the unifying principle of the soul. In alchemy, the union of the king and queen, the hieros gamos, represents this sublime moment when internal opposites meet and produce something new. Sexual energy then becomes a symbol of this union. By integrating it, we cease to be divided between spirit and body and begin to experience the totality of the soul. Genius in this context is not a gift reserved for a few. It is the expression of the self emerging through transformed libido to create something that has never existed before, a whole human being. We now come to part 5, inspiring conclusion, ending the script with a motivational and integrating message, connecting the acceptance and transformation of sexual energy to the process of individuation and the awakening of the inner genius. This section is also approximately 400 words long. What you deny makes you subject. What you accept, you transform. Carl Jung's sexual energy is a dangerous and sacred gift. Dangerous when unconscious, sacred when integrated. In a world that teaches us to fear our deepest impulses or to surrender them without conscience to immediate consumption, Jung invites us to a middle way, the way of inner transformation. He reminds us that the force that can destroy us is the same force that can save us, if we have the courage to know it and redirect it. Genius is not born of perfection, but of conflict, from the friction between desire and spirit, from the inner fire that has not been stifled or released at random, but welcomed with reverence and inner work. Geniuses are not superhuman beings. They are humans who have allowed themselves to go through their own darkness, who have made their impulses a path and not a prison. Each of us carries within us that vital energy, that creative spark, that eros that wants more than pleasure, it wants connection, expression, transcendence. When we accept our contradictions, the sacred and the profane, desire and silence, impulse and discernment, we begin the true process of individuation. We stop living only as masks, personas adapted to society, and start living as expanding souls. The question remains, what are you doing with your most vital energy? Is it being consumed, repressed, or sublimated? Is it serving repetition or creation, the prison of the ego or the liberation of the self? The alchemy of the soul happens in everyday life. When we choose to love with awareness, create with passion, live with presence. When we make the body a temple and not a trap. When we make sexuality a language of connection and not of power. When we understand that genius doesn't live outside but inside, waiting for us to open the floodgates so that dammed-up energy can become a source. And so, in the silence of our inner work, we discover that genius does not lie in being extraordinary, but in living the fullness of who we are. Sexual energy, transfigured into consciousness, leads us to true freedom, to be creators of ourselves, sculptors of our soul,